All right, music fans, welcome back. Harmless Dave here, talking real music in real time for real people just like you and just like me. So, this is Journey's record label, the label that released the last Journey album called Eclipse. The name of the record label is Frontiers Music. I talk about them quite often because guess what? They are one of the few labels that consistently puts out great melodic rock, most of which, if not almost all of it, is ignored by active rock and mainstream rock stations in the United States in the year 2020. Frontiers has been around since the mid-1990s, and they've put out a ton of music which constantly gets ignored by radio programmers. It's funny that Frontiers sent this message out to blabbermouth.net, Mr. Big Music, Ultimate Classic Rock, and my pal Eddie Trunk. By the way, I like Eddie. I just think there needs to be a point person in this country and in the world that has a large platform. I do not have a large platform compared to those in what I call real media. If you work for Sirius XM, you're working for real media. Okay, I'm on YouTube. Okay, I started uploading videos, and now I have about 29,000 plus subscribers. Good for me, right? But not a major player on the world stage when it comes to talking about new music. And the reason I've immediately jumped on the soapbox here is that let's throw this label under the bus about something that they didn't do. And then I'll read this and I'll get to my overarching point here. Regarding Mr. Big's Defying Gravity, which, by the way, despite what everybody is saying, that it was a lousy album, or the masters weren't that great, or yes, the band apparently didn't like it all that much, if you go and listen to it, it's not a bad record. It's a pretty decent record. Could it have been better? Possibly. I mean, when your band has Billy Sheehan in it, I understand that you want to put out the best product that you can. And by the way, I've always loved this band. This band got destroyed when the grunge apocalypse came along. And by the way, their success was peaking in 1992. So you see the problem. Moving forward after 1992, when Nirvana has dropped and Pearl Jam has dropped and all these things that changed the landscape, your melodic rock is no longer in vogue. Your great musicianship is no longer needed or wanted. All right, so for Mr. Big, it's a tragic situation. And there are a lot of other bands that really hit their stride in the early 1990s, and then all of a sudden they were gone. So Frontiers Music, which I do have an association with, by the way, they don't pay me though. I'm not on their payroll. They've been nice enough to let me hear new releases before they're released. They've given me interviews and so forth, access to different folks who record on their label. And I had an interview with Alessandro Del Vecchio not too long ago, and he's the key guy over there producing. Anyway, regarding Mr. Big's Defying Gravity, recently, there have been headlines circulating about an interview Billy Sheehan of Mr. Big did with Music Mania podcast and how Billy felt the record label ruined their last release, Defying Gravity. For those who took the time to listen to the interview, you'll have noticed that Billy never actually names Frontiers. He simply refers to the record label. Blabbermouth, Ultimate Classic Rock, and other news outlets inserted Frontiers' name into their stories about the interview. We can, of course, understand why they did this, because Frontiers released the album in most, but not all of the world. It was an understandable assumption that they made, but unfortunately an incorrect one. The reality is that Mr. Big had signed a separate, unrelated recording agreement with a Japanese label for the release of Defying Gravity. To reiterate, this had nothing to do with Frontiers. To the best of our knowledge, said label wished to release the album 1 month prior to the rest of the world. Based on this, we had planned to release the album on June 21st, 2017, due to a proposed May release date from the Japanese label. Ultimately, we moved the album to July 7th, and finally to July 21st due to delays in delivery of components of the album. June 21st was the Japanese release date per the Discogs database. We really don't know what happened between the Japanese label and Mr. Big. Frontiers can only say that we had nothing to do with the circumstances that led to a rushed delivery of the final album master. Now, I don't want to make a conspiracy where there probably isn't a conspiracy, because this is music, for crying out loud. By the way, these are some of the most talented musicians in the world, including the late drummer Pat Torpey, who was just an amazing drummer. And I don't think Mr. Big will record again because they don't have their amazing drummer anymore. But let's set the record straight. There is kind of this hostility, or these major players that have been in the industry and they've worked, for, Warner Brothers or CBS or what would be considered a major label today. All the labels in the United States today that were once amazing, Atlantic Records and so forth, who are now just putting out crap, like, all the time. And these guys, though, they worked in the industry during that time frame, and they kind of looked down upon a label like Frontiers Music and other European labels, or labels that are even based in the States. And, I hear things like, well, they send me these albums and I just don't hear any good songs on them. And I'm thinking, really? If I break out my stack of CDs like I did with Alessandro, I'm going to find a whole bunch of great music in there. And I don't know what you're comparing it to. I mean, what I've noticed is that artists today have to do an album that sometimes has 12, 13 tracks on it, and 10 of those tracks have to be super strong. Where in the old days, you could put out 10 songs, and maybe 3 or 4 of them would be radio friendly enough. Today, the percentage of those songs is actually much higher when it comes to melodic rock. Journey released their album Eclipse on Frontiers. Chicago released their last studio album, the one with Jason Scheff, called Now, via Frontiers Music. And I can go down the list with different artists that have gone over to Frontiers, been treated really well, put out an album, got some worldwide distribution, and got 0 airplay here in the States, and got 0 recognition from the so-called elite broadcasting group here, which since the 90s has basically been defending the status quo when it comes to music, music is so subjective. No, music is either good or it's not good. It's somewhat subjective in the sense that your taste might be different than my taste, and I will say, somebody sent me a real proggy thing recently that I listened to. And I said, okay, this isn't really my wheelhouse, but it's good for what it is. All right? That's different, though, from just ignoring music that's been coming from various parts of the world now for about 25 years, just ignoring it and, defending this little group of artists that continues to release albums on, maybe they're major label records, because I don't pay attention to what, label they're on. But they dominate radio playlists on every format, where there's so much repetition and there's very little diversity. Every vocalist kind of sounds the same, and they've been sounding that way for about 25 to 30 years now. And so this kind of bugs me that this really great Italian record label comes under fire, falsely accused of something they didn't do. Because not only do you need to marginalize them and say, oh yeah, they release a lot of stuff, but, you know, I'm waiting to hear some good songs. That's what I've heard. I've heard a couple of guys who do Sirius XM or do whatever they do talk about this in a way that just is very dismissive. Brand new Dennis DeYoung album just released on Frontiers. Amazing record. I mean, you could go down the list of amazing releases this year. DeCarlo, Tommy DeCarlo, lead singer of Boston. You think that would be on a rock station? Of course not. Of course not. Doesn't fit the angry dark template that has become mainstream or active rock radio today. All right, I'm done with this video. Yeah, I got the Frontier shirt on. 1,000 releases, and most of them ignored by American radio. But consumers, because we're smart, we go on YouTube, we get those premiere videos when they come out. I know a lot of people who have personally thanked me for pointing them to Revolution Saints. And a band, there's no reason a band like Revolution Saints should not be on an active rock station right now as we speak. There's no reason, there's no logic for it, why they're not on there. And there are a list of bands, I mean, if I went through the entire roster of groups that this label has, FM just dropped a new album. Does anybody in the States know who FM is? I mean, they've been around since the 80s, and they got a little airplay, and they backed up some major artists like Foreigner. But did the United States, did we ever play their music? No, we didn't play it then, and we're certainly not going to play it now. It's just a pattern. It's an ongoing pattern. So when I read a story like this, and I love Mr. Big, but it's like, let's create some negative publicity for the only label that's been doing this consistently and who wants to keep this format alive. By the way, they just released a brand new song by LA Guns. All right, fantastic track. And I'm not a huge LA Guns fan, but I actually did a video about it here. LA Guns, aren't they the cool band that Eddie Trunk talks about all the time? It's in his wheelhouse. It's like he goes over their houses and hangs out and has a great time or something and always knows everything that's going on with them. Frontiers music, folks. That's where you'll find LA Guns right now. So, again, it'd be nice if American radio would at least say, you know what? Maybe we can trust people to do the right thing. And maybe they won't turn the dial. And maybe we should set up some tours in the future where one of these up-and-coming bands like Waiting for Monday could piggyback on someone else's big old dinosaur rock tour. The stadium tour featuring the oldest bands that we can find. How about something that's a little fresher? Maybe one of the 4 bands could be somebody that you've not heard of that might sound similar or have some appeal with the folks that are going to these shows. All right, folks, I'm done. Mr. Big, they deserve obviously better. And if that Japanese label, whatever, dropped the ball, they dropped the ball. It's a shame because that'll probably be their last album, and that's probably why they're kind of lamenting the situation. But don't dump on the one label that has kept this alive for, like, what, 25 years and counting now? When the music industry collapsed, Serafino said, hey, there's a lane here now where there wasn't a lane before. I think I'm going to start a record label. And a lot of people have been very happy about this. And the label continues to grow, and they continue to sell records, and I'm happy to have a loose affiliation with them. So, again, that's my video. I just ruined another soapbox, but I'll get another one, believe me, soon.